Hello and welcome back to KeyDigital's online training for compass control, level C1 part 6. Are you ready for it? Programming the KD-ZRC 300 in Compass Navigator, of course. So these system design schematics are going to be very important because now we're actually programming. We talked about in the previous course how important it is that all of your wiring, your connectivity, everything is well planned for and that everything is correct in that. So keep that in mind, and we're going to actually be programming a sample system that is a single zone, just a single display with some standard AV equipment, but also some not standard, what we call special case devices like lighting and security systems. So as a quick reminder of how the compass control system works for the KD-CC Kit 1000, which means you have your MC 1000, your KD-ZRC 300, and your KD-ZRX 200. Any button pressed on the ZRC 300 is communicated via Zigbee, it's radio frequency, to the KD-ZRX 200, the Zigbee transceiver antenna, which then has a hardwire connectivity into the KD-MC 1000's Zigbee port. In order for that KD-ZRC 300 and KD-ZRX 200 to speak together, they do need to be paired. So this is step number one. On the underside of the KD-ZRX 200, there is a pair button, which you will press and hold until the blue light inside of the KD-ZRX 200 translucent dome begins blinking rapidly. Once it begins blinking rapidly, you can press and hold the A and C buttons on the compass control KD-ZRC 300 handheld remote, which will stop that rapid blinking of the blue light on the Zigbee transceiver. And now they're successfully paired. You could press any button on the ZRC 300, even if you've not programmed the remote yet. You could press any button and you will see your button presses correspond with a single blink of that blue light in the ZRX 200 dome. Now, the ZRC 300 can be inserted in, as we discussed earlier, into custom or modular projects, but we do recommend modular. And the reason for that is because the ZRC 300 is not just for your standard devices like televisions and cable boxes and you know, your standard consumer type entertainment viewing devices, right? But they're also for those special case devices like lighting systems and security systems and that sort of thing. So for that reason, we recommend a module, because when you import a module into the Zigbee remote control, then that module has assignments for each function on specific buttons. Now, in a standard device, again, television, cable box, Blu-ray player, DVD player, etc., you know that the volume plus is going to have the volume plus function on it. However, for a special case device, there might be a need to be a little more training involved on what type of functionality is placed on each button. Okay? Now, it's very important to understand how the ZRC 300 knows, and the Compass Navigator software knows, what functions to place on the respective button of the ZRC 300. And to know that is to know something that we teach you about in the C2 course. This something is called action IDs. Action IDs are names assigned to a specific function, a name that comes from our software. Our software, you can name a function anything you like, but then also you should apply the action ID name to an applicable command or function, so that we know out of all the buttons in the world, whether you want to call power on PWRN and power off PWRF, our software doesn't really know that that means power on and power off, yet we have this handheld remote. So we should know what is power on and power off so that those kind of functions can automatically apply to the correct button and be assigned to the correct button, right? So I'm here in my IR manager, and we have two columns here. Function name, this is anything you'd like to name a function. For example, AnyNet there. What if I'm somebody who, again, wants to take the lazy way, NENet? Well, it says AnyNet, doesn't it? How does our software know that it's AnyNet, right? So we come to the action IDs here, and I just press that button so that we can organize according to the action ID number assignment. And here you are, power on, power off. So again, if I wanted to be lazy and call it PWR instead of spelling out the word power, I could do that in the function name. I could call it whatever I'd like to call it. However, you should still go in by double clicking into this action ID cell to find the respective action ID. And once that's there, for example, power toggle has been taken, well, it's no longer available in that dropdown. And this forces you and the library to speak the language of our software, right? So that's action ID, and we talk more about that in the C2 training videos. So pardon the slow speed of my computer here as we go through this software, screen recording software. So this enables you, on a standard device, we're going to put the power on function according to the action ID on the power on button. Power off with power off, volume plus with volume plus, volume minus with volume minus, etc. However, once again, a special case device may not be as automatic, and so for our modules, you know, we want to interface with lighting systems, security systems, etc. We have actually created a manual for those special case devices per device. So it's individual manual per special device, whereas a generic device like that television, Blu-ray player, etc., we have a generic category manual just to walk you through all of that. So programming the KD ZRC300 in Compass Navigator. Here we have a guide for our system, and this is a basic practice sheet that we hand out at our in-house trainings, for example, of a generic rack that we have with some entertainment type devices. You have your MC1000, the IP address, the Zigbee remote, and the ID number of that Zigbee remote. And actually, this is something that we've not brought to your attention so far. We've talked about the device ID of the iOS device. However, each Zigbee remote also has its own unique ID number, which can be most simply found in the battery compartment. It's all numerical in the case of the Zigbee remote, so this is actually the serial number, omitting the letters from that serial number. The letters are positioned at the beginning and end of that serial number, so all the numbers in the middle, that is the ID number. And if that sticker were ever to somehow peel off or whatnot, you can also collect the information digitally through a USB connection in Compass Navigator. So your router ID and your television, what port is it connected to? As we work our way down in the blue box, TV, CBX, that stands for our cable box, right? Which we have a TiVo device, it's an IP, and what is the input it's connected to on the Sony AV receiver? It's called SAT cable. Your Apple TV, or your ATV device, Apple TV, controlled off of port 3, configured as IR. It's input 3, called game on the Sony AV receiver. Your Blu-ray player, or the BRP button device, connected on IR port 4, Sony input 1, the BD input. The AV receiver is a Sony AVR, 192.168.1.140 is its IP address, and that's connected to your LG television on input 10, which is called HDMI 3. Your security is a Honeywell security system, RS-232. Looks like that's on port number 5. And then finally, your automation device, your lighting, we're just going to do lighting in this system, is Lutron, controlled via IP, 192.168.1.80 is its IP address. So with that being said, we can now open up our Compass Navigator software. So it opens up to the last project I was in, or in your case, if this is your very first time in Compass Navigator making a project, you'll go to File, New, and we'll do a module-based project. I'm just going to browse to where I'd like to place this. And I'm going to create a folder, and we highly recommend you work in a separate folder from the default download directory that we install Compass Control into, because you don't want to lose any work if you completely uninstall. Enter this folder here. And save, and it is saving a KSP, that's a KeyDigital system project. Press OK. Okay, so it starts us off in our very first screen, which is essentially the same as if I went into that program tab that I told you about previously and pressed Setup Controllers. So in the Program tab, we could go in, press Setup Controllers, and then we'll continue to work from left to right, like reading a book. Now, we choose our remote. This is going to be Zigbee remote. And we can name it. We could supply the ID number of that Zigbee remote, which is again collected in that battery compartment of the Zigbee remote. We add that controller in, and it populates on the left-hand side. Our master controller, here we see the list of all of our master controllers. We of course need an MC1000, and it is set to IP address 192.168.1.22 according to that sheet that I had reviewed with you guys earlier. Now the Lutron and HAI and UPB systems, we get to leave those out for right now. This is if we need to, if we're going to have an iOS control system, but right now we're just worried about the ZRC, not the iOS. Device ID generator I get to skip right over, as that is to generate a device ID, once again, of an iOS controller. And we get to go right ahead to add modules, where we get to add all of the devices that are going to be in the system. The modules are divided by control format, IR, RS-232, TCP/IP, and then user or local module. Local is the modules that we supply. So we'll go ahead and we'll start off with our IR controlled devices. I could type the brand name in, choose the brand, and we have our television is LG. This is the name of the module, and it's a very generic name because many devices obviously fall under the same remote code for them, but you can see all of the functions here. And we had an LG television as well as the LG Blu-ray player, so this indicates that it's a Blu-ray player by that icon, and I could add that device in as well. And pardon the speed of my computer here, this recording software is really slowing it down. And once that populates all the list of functions here, your computer should be a lot faster. We'll go ahead and add that device in. Okay. What other IR devices do we have? We have an Apple TV. So let's go ahead and just scroll up to that brand here. Here is Apple. No. Now we choose Apple TV. And add that device in. Great. So now we can proceed to our RS-232 devices. Our Honeywell security panel, the Vista P20, or the Vista 20. And jump on into TCP/IP, where the rest of our devices are, including the Lutron. Now, the Lutron is divided into three categories here: HVAC, light, and shade, and that's because we have you have to choose the device category, and we have the LSH button, lighting, shade, HVAC. And so we have a generic module that you'll refer to the manual on how to use, and this is why we did not have to import the XML file in the first step, the setting up controllers, because importing that XML file is if you have iOS only, will create graphics, bidirectional driver, etc., etc. We'll add our Sony AVR into the system. And finally, our TiVo Romeo device. Great, so now we're able to actually skip assign zone and zone construction. If you're just doing a handheld remote, those steps aren't necessary. Those steps are only necessary if you have an iOS device. Now, as a note, assign zone and zone construction in the future will be something that you can optionally do for a Zigbee remote control, where we will auto-compile device selection macros onto the blue buttons when you press those according to your zone construction. So if you'd like to know more about that, just jump into our C1 training video on programming an iOS device, and you'll see it's exactly the same thing. So we're able now to go to controlling flow, and controlling flow is really when you control a device, what port does it execute out of the MC1000? So this is control connectivity from the MC1000. Okay, what devices are connected to what port, and the control format as well. So that means, very important, step number one is taking that MC1000, as I have done, and drag and release as the project name highlights blue. So now you have your MC1000 with all of its ports, and now, very, very important, the second step, so this is always step number two, is taking your Zigbee remote control and dragging it to that Zigbee port. And when you do that, all of the port names and connections on the MC1000 change over to the device name. So you're able to take your television and drag and drop to the device TV port. You're able to take your Blu-ray player and drag and drop to the device BRP, Blu-ray player port, the Apple TV to the device ATV. Of course, any media streamer should go on that same port, right? ATV or media streaming port. Now our cable box, what do we do about this? Because this is not IR, it is TCP/IP. So we just select that port and change over in its properties. Now we could drag that IP controllable device to the cable box device. Same thing with our AVR, right? It is TCP/IP. Take that to the device AVR. Our security was RS-232, not IR. And if you also recall, it was on port 5. So let's change that over here. So this is how you do that. I wanted to show you. And finally, the Lutron goes to the device light, which is IP controllable. Now this is a great opportunity to save. All right, save early, save often. And now this is a good opportunity to make sure all of your IP addresses are set correctly. We know we set our IP address of our MC1000 as we dragged it in. The Zigbee remote has its device ID number. How about the IP for the Romeo? I refer to my sheet, and it was at 1.50. And the modules come in with that default port number. of that device because some devices require a specific port number. Our Sony AV receiver was 1.140. And our ZRC Lutron module, our Lutron, is controllable on device or on IP address 1.80. Very good, that's already set. And now we'll be able to successfully communicate when we control those devices. So we return to the programming step. Flow test is really if you wanted to just test some of these control codes as they're now, if your devices are actually connected to those ports, you could select the device and choose from its available commands and just hit that play button. Compile project is only necessary if we have a zone construction made in the iOS or when that is available in the Zigbee remote control. Edit system is where you are able to see each of the buttons and all of the commands that are on there. So how this works, power on, for example, I select that. That's the button. And we have all of these tabs. So if I had pressed the TV button first, then it's going to send power on to the television. Of course, for example, Apple TV, we know that doesn't have an actual power on, does it? So right now, we click that event in action, and we see Apple TV, but there is no command populated there because there is no such thing as a power on function for Apple TV. Our Blu-ray player, for example, though, does have a discrete power on. Okay, so this is how it works, and this is basically at this point a generic handheld remote control, except for we can also control things like our security system, right? Our Honeywell. So what do we have there? Honeywell, or if I go to my security tab, then I'm sending 1. Here's a list of our Honeywell functions. So you could step by step arm and disarm your system, right? Or you could build a macro to do that. But this right now is just a generic handheld remote. So before we go into building macros and whatnot, we will just show you how you would do the upload. Now remember, the upload goes into the master controller, into the MC1000, because the Zigbee remote control just tells the MC1000 what button has been pressed. The master controller has the storage for the events and actions of each button press. So you would just come to your master controller here, and at this point you would need your computer and that is running Navigator, obviously, and your MC1000 to be on the same network. That MC1000 needs to be set to the IP address as we have specified here. And you would just go ahead and press Update and choose TCP/IP, and then press Load Project into Master Controller. And we're going to go ahead and skip showing you this load temporarily here because I'll jump into a different computer in our training room for this actual rack. So you'd press this load and you'd actually see all of the status update here, and we'll show you how that all works. And at this point, you've actually completed a basic universal remote, a standard universal remote that has all of the functionality of a basic universal remote and the added functionality of, you know, interfacing with a Honeywell system for security and a Lutron system for lighting and those sorts of automation devices, as well as the cable box via IP, for example. So once this loading would be done, you'd be able to immediately just press any buttons on your handheld remote control, and you'd see the blue light blink in the Zigbee receiver, and you'd also see your multifunction, the LED lights on the face of the MC1000 that correspond with the multifunction ports for your IR and RS-232 device. You'd see those blinking, right? So actually that has completed a basic program load of just like basically a standard universal remote control, right? Now we could go ahead and I mentioned programming some macros. For example, your Honeywell security system, do you want it to your client to have to press 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 to arm and 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 to disarm? Or perhaps you could make a really cool macro for them where we could go over to the A button, A for arm, right? Or the red button as it's identified here in the tree. And we could customize this to be arm. How do we arm it? Well, we send commands to the Honeywell, so we're under the security tab, and we just begin to form this event in action. So I've just now duplicated my 1, 2, 3, 4, and I duplicated by doing Control D a moment ago, or you could even select, if you're somebody who likes to right click and duplicate 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 will be our ARM macro, except for some devices you have to really space out the amount of time in between button presses. So that's a delay event in action that we have there. And let's say we give 0.2 seconds in between each of these button presses. So 1, then wait 0.2 seconds, then 2, wait 0.2 seconds, 3, wait 0.2 seconds, then 4. So that's a basic macro. How about the macro that is your device selection buttons? So I'm going to zoom on in here, and we have our device select buttons, these blue buttons here. So for example, cable box. Well, the trick about these device select buttons, right now, again, you do have to manually build these macros, but in the future, we will have these macros automatically built if you complete the assign zone and zone construction steps, as we'll outline in the iOS programming training. And also you should keep in mind this is also outlined in the manual for the KDZRC 300 programming manual. So the trick is you're on the cable box button. You also need to be on that cable box tab. And then you could go ahead and program any amount of things that you'd like on there. For example, you might want to make sure that your LG television is powered on. You would like to make sure that your Sony AV receiver is also powered on. You usually need to wait a few seconds after turning something on, or a brief amount of time anyway. So let's change our TiVo perhaps to the favorite channel. Cable box, TiVo, this is an IP command. Let's say it's channel 100. So these are all of your events and actions here. IR, RS-232, TCP/IP, relay if there was a screen to control, delay, okay? So we did that before, and we're going to do that again, right? Say point IP is usually a little faster, so 0.1. Now I'll just copy and paste channel 100. Okay. And now we can make sure that our TV, so I'll just take the TV command and duplicate, is on the proper input. According to that guide we had before, the proper input for the AV receiver into the television is HDMI 3, also known as input 10. And that your AV receiver, Control D to duplicate, is selecting the cable box, which goes into the AV receiver on input 4, also known as the SAT cable input. So that was like a all-in-one macro, you know, turning on the entire room just in a single button press, making sure devices on their appropriate input. And you might have to fine-tune your delays per device. We could do something similar on the Apple TV, or maybe we don't do something quite as elaborate. Maybe we want to not worry about the powering on the TV and AV receiver, for example. So I go to what's most important here on these device select macros, the blue button, device select, and the corresponding tab. And we have some function on there. I could just delete that. And now I can click in here and Control V to paste. So let's, again, not worry so much about all of the channel numbers and powering on the devices, but we do need to make sure that our Apple TV is awake, and I like to wake it up with just a left command because it's pretty harmless. Even if it's already on, hitting left doesn't send you to the guide and stop your streaming. The television, input 10, because that's connected to the AV receiver, and the AV receiver was into the game input when we were watching the Apple TV. Now I could kind of grab this here and go to my Blu-ray player button now, and my Blu-ray player. And just out of the sake of repetition, we'll do this here as well, although I'd imagine you have your understanding now. So we don't have to wake up the Apple TV when we press the Blu-ray player button, right? Let's go to the Blu-ray player instead, and you could hit something like play to wake that up if it's asleep. Input 10 on the television, and it was into our AV receiver input, or our Blu-ray player BD input on the AV receiver. So now I could save, and we've just now kind of advanced to the next step of programming the ZRC300. So step number one was just the basic universal remote functionality, the functions that you would expect on each button being automatically placed there in many cases, or in all cases. And then step number two is making some advanced macros on these device select buttons, for example. We did our selection events on the arm and disarm in the security arm. That's my arm macro, and I'm not sure that I did it or not. Let me copy that. Let me go to my D button for my disarm security. Paste all of those events, and in this case it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 for this security panel to be disarmed. Okay, so at this point we're going to transfer over to my training room computer, and we'll do our actual upload, and then we'll switch over to a webcam to record the Zigbee or the MC1000 responding to our commands. Okay, so now I've moved over to my laptop computer in my training room, and I'm ready to upload this project that is not only a standard universal remote, but we have programmed now some advanced macros into it. So we just need to make sure we're on the same network with the master controller, and that the IP address of your master controller is set properly. And we can go ahead and update. So this is in the properties of the KDMC1000. We're going to update via the network, and we will go ahead and load project to MC. It connects with that master controller, and we see the status here, 1 through 100. Meanwhile, on the face of our KDMC1000, we see a steady blinking amber colored light on the link light on the face of that unit. So now that we have successfully loaded the project into our MC1000, we could go ahead and press any of the buttons on the Zigbee remote control. Those button presses are communicated via Zigbee, of course, and received by the MC1000 via the KDZRX200 Zigbee receiver. So we could start with something very basic here, like powering on our television. And we'll see what it has fired on to. Or of course, we could have programmed a macro to go right into our default source. Looks like we're on our Blu-ray player, in fact. Let's go ahead and switch it over to our Apple TV on that single blue device button select. We can now navigate through using the directional arrows, for example, of the Apple TV. So this is so far so good, right? Everything that you would expect of a universal remote control. How about some of those special cases? For example, our Honeywell RS-232 controllable security panel. We press the security button and A for that special macro. There it is, armed. And D, and you even should see 4 blue blinks of the light on our MC1000 to disarm. Very good. How about our IP controllable Lutron lighting dimmer? Let's go ahead and turn that on, or turn it off, or perhaps set it to 30% level and incrementally increase the level from there, pressing and holding or applying multiple presses to our up or down arrows. So there you have it, a very successful load of the ZRC300. And what we'll do next is apply our television as a local IR device instead of a device being controlled through the Zigbee and commands being executed out of the MC1000. So now if we'd like to move one of our devices or all of our devices over to line of sight IR, we go into the Zigbee properties. So we select the Zigbee remote control and we just choose the device or devices that you'd like to move to IR. And it's really as simple as that in the navigator, but then on the handheld remote you will press A and 2 at the same time, press and hold, and both the on and off buttons illuminate. So now we press Update IR, and it says that it's connected successfully, and we see the status here in this status window, status cells of our property window for the Zigbee remote control. So this continues on the Zigbee remote control, and then also on our MC1000 we have some blinking lights, our link light and our status light, as well as the blue indicator light of the ZRX200 just blinking steadily throughout the updating here. When this is all done, we're able to clear the learn mode of the ZRC300 by a simple press of the C button. So we'll do that in a moment after this is completed. Okay, so it tells us now that it is updated successfully. The MC1000 and the ZRX200 have stopped blinking. However, my ZRX300, if you're able to see it, excuse me, my ZRC300 still has the on and off buttons illuminated. So now I go ahead and I just press C to clear it. And if I press TV to power off, it went ahead and did that. And what you may have noticed is that the MC1000 doesn't blink, nor does the ZRX200. So I'll do that one more time, and if you could see these lights, there we are, power on, yet no response out of the MC1000 because it was that local line of sight IR. All right, so let's review what we've gone over in this C1 Part 6, programming the KD ZRC300 handheld remote in Compass Navigator. So we started off reminding you how the CC Kit 1000 works. The CC Kit 1000 consists of the MC1000, the ZRC300 handheld remote, and the ZRX200 Zigbee transceive device. The ZRC300 has those buttons on it, and we're able to automatically attach the appropriate functions onto those buttons in a standard typical device, right? What is a standard or typical device? A television, a Blu-ray player, a cable box, those sorts of devices that fit normally on that universal remote quite well. However, in some cases, we also have, well, in many cases with this system, we are integrating with special case devices, as we call them, like a Lutron lighting system that's controllable via IP, like a Honeywell security panel that's controllable via RS-232. And so because of those cases, we recommend using modules because those commands are already attached to some reasonable buttons, and then we document that in the manuals for the Zigbee remote system. Then we introduced you to our sample system that we programmed together, first as a typical universal remote. What does that mean? Those blue device buttons were really just used to dictate what the next button pressed would apply to, what commands or what devices those next button functions commands would control what device. Then we took it to the next step, which is we included smart macros, those device select macros on those blue device buttons, which again, in the future, we're looking at having those automatically populate if you build your zone construction tree, which we'll show you more in the C1 video where we program the iOS module. And then we even did a macro for our security system, for example, to arm and disarm all of the many functions on a single button press. We loaded and tested our project first as a standard, with the typical universal remote and with the smart macros, right? But then secondly, we said, you know what? Our television is in fact going to be line of sight IR. So we updated that device to be line of sight IR control. And then we reloaded once again, and we controlled that television via line of sight IR, and everything checked out just fine. So we want to thank you guys very much for joining us for C1 Part 6. We're getting very close to the end of C1. So next, C1 Part 7. We'll see you guys there.